how do good people that start off well-meaning and pure end up screwing everything up and becoming a jerk at the end of their life? How do good organizations that have a pure heart and a good focus and mission, vision, values, how do they screw everything up over time? How does this happen inside of movements? This is a question that I'm constantly digging in and trying to understand through history. You look at the kings in the Old Testament, and you see people that started off well, and then they screwed it all up. One of the things that we found in this research was this book we just wrote, Box Wine and Bad Ideas, is in the early Methodist movement. This early Methodist movement, the Moravians and the Methodists, they changed society. They were changing culture. They were changing the world. They started the missions movement as we know it. They led to things and people like William Wilberforce that got slavery, the British West Indies slave trade abolished. They were completely changing culture, raising up the average everyday person. They called themselves the church within the church, and they were going out, seeping into the cracks and crevices of society, and they were changing the world. That's what the church is supposed to be, salt and light. And that's what it was, and then over time it became an institution. One of the things, not that institutions are inherently bad, but can an institution also be a radical movement that sustains? I don't know. That's what we're digging into in this book, in this research, in these videos. If you want to read along as these videos come out, there's a link below and you can go and read each chapter as we put these out. One of the things that we found interesting was the financial management with the early Methodist movement and how that financial management contributed to the atrophy of this fresh flowing movement. So here's a quote from the book. John Wesley was incredibly generous and intentional with his personal giving to meet the needs and serve the poor. One biographer, Henry Moore, estimated that he gave away some 30,000 pounds over the course of his life, approximately $8 million today. Wesley would raise funds from preaching sermons, his society meetings, or his publishing house to meet needs among the poor in London. They founded medical clinics, distributed food and clothes, they started charitable schools and more. So earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. This is what Wesley constantly taught. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. But what happened was his generosity never translated into the heartbeat of the Methodist movement. At first it was. They were contributing to things like the Kingswood School that was doing incredible work in educating young people, lifting people out of poverty. It was amazing what they were doing with the Kingswood School. That was the focus, was generosity. But over time it started to change. And you will notice if you go and read John Wesley's sermons, he was getting more and more pissed off the older he got. And I don't think it was just because he was getting old. I think it was because he was frustrated and disappointed that the heartbeat of the Holy Spirit inside of him that was allowing him to preach the way that he preached, to give the way that he gave, to do the things that he was doing, to serve in the way that he was serving, it wasn't translating into the movement as the movement continued to grow. Here was one of the sermons that he preached, a little quote from it. He said, "You may find that many observe the first rule, which is gain all you can. You may find a few observe the second rule, which is save all you can. But how many of you have been found to observe the third rule, which is give all you can? Have you reason to believe that 500 of these are to be found among 50,000 Methodists? And yet nothing can be more plain than that all who observe the first two rules without the third will be twofold more children of hell than they ever were before." Like if you go and just start to collect money for yourself and you're gaining all you can and then you're saving all you can, but you're not giving all you can, you're a reservoir holding on to everything, you're not a river that's sending it out and doing good with it, then not just are you going to possess this money, but that money is going to possess you. So you're listening to the first two parts of the sermon, you're earning all you can, you're saving all you can, but you're not giving all you can. And it's killing you, and it's killing this movement, and it's killing the church. Because now all of a sudden, you're focused on this stuff that you possess, and it now possesses you. And so this is, if you look at his sermons later in his life, this was a giant frustration that he had. One of the reasons for this, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons for this was what started to happen as the movement started to grow. As the movement started to grow, they started raising up preachers, they started raising up leaders. As they're raising up leaders, they're having revival in these areas. Wesley's going and preaching. He's releasing other preachers into these areas. They're going to the Cornish mining industry, and they're preaching to people that don't have church and chapels around, and these people are radically giving their lives to Christ. All this amazing stuff is starting to happen, but the problem became, once these areas started to grow with people, they wanted a place to gather, obviously. So they started building chapels. Well, now there's one area has a chapel because they had a bunch of people and they had the finances, so they used the money to build a chapel. This other area, you have revival that happens somewhere else. As the revival happens, what happened was the metric for success became not baptisms, not salvation, not the way that we're serving the poor, not the amount that we're giving, not the fruits of the Spirit. The metric for success started to become whether or not we have a chapel. And it started to suck the life out of the movement. Literally and figuratively, because it started to suck the life out of the movement because it started to drain the entire Methodist movement financially. Because now they would have revival in an area, they're constructing a chapel, but they don't have the people to sustain what's happening there. So now the Methodist movement as a whole, the governing body, has to start taking funds from everywhere else to fund these chapels. So much so that by 1800, they were paying more money paying off the loans to chapels than they were giving to Kingswood School, which was their main focus financially giving at the beginning of this movement. It became a problem. So the chapels weren't the problem. The problem was they made the chapels the point. Listen to this. By the time Wesley died, he had around 400 full-time preachers around delivering somewhere around 150,000 sermons a year in around 4,000 different locations at an annual cost of around 40,000 pounds. 40,000 pounds. Remember, Wesley gave away around 30,000 pounds, which is around $8 million. So now everything that they're doing is getting more expensive. But part of it makes sense because now these young preachers are starting to get older. They're starting to have families. So they're getting salaries now. They're not just bivocational. So all of the focus started to change, which isn't inherently a bad thing in and of itself. But what starts to happen is the metrics change. The metrics for success change. Am I a paid pastor? Do I have a chapel? The focus started to change. And it went from we need to go out and change society to this is what we want for ourselves. This is what we want our church to look like. This is what we want our building to be like. This is the metrics for success changed. And it made me think of in Matthew 6, it's 6:19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Listen, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Every time I used to read this, I thought that little eyes piece in the middle, it seemed out of place, but I had always thought it was just the way that you focus. If I focus on the money or if I focus on the stuff that I'm going to get, then inevitably it's going to snuff the light out in me because I'm not going to be showing the light of Jesus. That's what I thought. It was about our focus, which is true enough, but this was actually a saying back then. If you had healthy eyes, it meant you were a generous person. If you had unhealthy eyes, it meant you were a stingy person. What happened is over time, the treasures became what we had on earth rather than storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven, and the sacrifice that these people had that this movement was built on the backs of. There were Moravians that, I remember these two guys sold themselves into slavery to go and minister to slaves. The Moravians would go and do their own funerals oftentimes before they would go on missions around the world because they just assumed that they weren't coming back. There was this beautiful, pure heartbeat of this movement that created fresh, flowing wine. But then over time, the lack of generosity and the lack of focus on what we can give and the focus on what we could get in building our little kingdom here started to suck the life out of something that was changing the world.